David Reeves was in his basement trying to fix a crack in the foundation when his sledgehammer broke through more than just concrete. He had owned the house in Sacramento, California for 11 years. The foundation had been settling unevenly, causing stress fractures along the eastern wall. David worked as a high school math teacher and couldn't afford to hire contractors for every repair. He had spent the morning mixing concrete and preparing to patch the damage himself when the hammer went through the wall and kept going. There was a hollow space behind it. He pulled away more concrete and found himself staring into darkness. He aimed his phone's flashlight into the gap and saw metal, lots of metal, stacked in rows. He stopped working and stood there for several minutes, trying to understand what he was looking at. David's financial situation had been tight for years. He earned $52,000 annually as a teacher. His wife, Monica, worked part-time at a local library, bringing in another $18,000. They had 2 daughters in elementary school. The mortgage was $1,200 a month. Student loans from both their degrees took another $600. Car payments, insurance, groceries, utilities. There wasn't much left over. They had $1,700 in savings. Their credit cards carried a combined balance of $14,000. David had been wearing the same 3 pairs of work pants for 4 years. Monica cut everyone's hair in the kitchen. They hadn't taken a vacation since their youngest was born. The foundation crack had appeared 6 months earlier and had been growing. David knew it needed fixing before it caused structural damage. He couldn't put it off anymore. That morning, he had gone to the hardware store and bought concrete mix, a trowel, and safety goggles. He already owned the sledgehammer. He figured he could handle the job over the weekend and save the $1,500 a contractor would charge. The house itself was built in 1947. David and Monica had bought it in 2012 for $280,000. It was a modest single-story ranch with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The neighborhood was decent but not wealthy. Most houses on the street dated from the same post-war building boom. The previous owner had been an elderly woman named Margaret Holt, who had lived there since 1953. She passed away at 91, and her estate sold the property. David and Monica never met her. The home inspection had been standard. No major issues. The basement was unfinished, just concrete walls and a cement floor. David used it for storage and his workbench. Nothing about the house suggested anything unusual. The foundation was poured concrete, typical for its era. The eastern wall faced the neighbor's property and was partially underground due to the sloping lot. That's where the crack had formed. David had assumed it was normal settling after 70 years. When David broke through that morning, he wasn't expecting anything except dirt and possibly some old construction debris. The hollow space was roughly 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep and 5 feet tall. It had been deliberately created, formed with wooden framing and sealed behind a false concrete panel. The panel had cracked along with the genuine foundation, which is what made it visible. Inside the cavity, stacked neatly on wooden shelves, were dozens of metal containers. David pulled away more concrete carefully. The containers were ammunition boxes, military surplus, green metal with hinged lids and latching handles. They were arranged in 3 rows, packed tightly. David counted them, 42 boxes total. Each one was labeled with strips of yellowed masking tape and handwritten numbers. The handwriting was shaky but legible. The boxes were heavy. David pulled one out carefully and set it on his workbench. His hands were shaking. He opened the latch. The box was filled with coins, gold coins. They were packed in cloth bags, 6 bags per box. David opened one bag and poured coins onto the workbench. They clinked against the wood with a solid, heavy sound. The coins were various sizes. Some were large, about the size of a $50. Others were smaller. They all had the same deep yellow color and weight that could only be gold. David picked one up. It was dated 1874. The front showed Liberty's profile surrounded by stars. The back had an eagle. The words $20 were stamped clearly. It was a double eagle, a $20 gold piece from before the Federal Reserve. David had seen these in history books. He set it down and picked up another, 1892, then another, 1907. The dates ranged from the 1860s to the 1920s. Every coin was gold. David's first thought was that this couldn't be real. His second thought was that if it was real, it was worth a fortune. His third thought was that someone had hidden this deliberately, and he needed to be very careful about what came next. He closed the box and carried it upstairs. Monica was in the kitchen making lunch. David set the box on the table without saying anything. Monica looked at him, then at the box. She asked what it was. David opened it and showed her. Monica stared at the contents for several seconds. Then she asked where it came from. David explained about the wall. Monica sat down. They both sat there looking at the open ammunition box filled with bags of gold coins. Neither of them spoke for almost a minute. Then Monica asked if it was real. David said he didn't know, but it looked real. Monica asked how much it might be worth. David said he had no idea, but it was definitely a lot. Then he told her there were 41 more boxes just like it in the basement. Before they did anything else, David and Monica needed to understand what they actually had. They brought all 42 boxes upstairs over the next hour, making multiple trips. They cleared the dining room and stacked the boxes against the wall. Then they started opening them systematically. Every box contained coins. Most were gold. A few boxes contained silver dollars, but the majority was gold. There were double eagles, eagles which were $10 pieces, half eagles which were $5 pieces, and quarter eagles which were $2.50 pieces. The dates spanned from 1838 to 1933. Many were from the 1800s. Some were remarkably well preserved, showing minimal wear. Others showed circulation, but were still intact. David started making notes. He counted bags, then counted coins per bag, then started estimating totals. It took 3 hours. His final count was staggering. There were approximately 6,300 gold coins. Roughly 4,000 were double eagles. About 1,500 were eagles. The rest were smaller denominations. There were also around 800 silver dollars. David knew that gold coins had value beyond their face value. Gold itself was worth around $1,900 per ounce at that time. A double eagle contained nearly 1 full ounce of gold, but he also knew that old coins had numismatic value, meaning collectors paid premiums for rare dates and good condition. He had no expertise in this area. He needed professional help. But he was also terrified of telling anyone. The coins had been hidden. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal them. Were they stolen? Were they legal to own? Could the government seize them? David spent that evening researching gold ownership laws. He learned that private gold ownership had been restricted from 1933 to 1974 under Executive Order 6102, which required citizens to turn in most gold coins. But that order had been repealed. It was now legal to own gold coins. Coins minted before 1933 were specifically exempt from the original order. Everything David had appeared to fall into that category. The next question was ownership. Who did these coins belong to? David owned the house. The coins were inside his house, hidden in the structure. California law generally states that property found within the boundaries of owned land belongs to the landowner, unless there's a clear rightful owner who can be identified and who has a legal claim. David researched the previous owner. Margaret Holt had lived in the house for 60 years. She had been widowed in 1971. Her husband, Robert Holt, had been a postal worker. They had no children. Margaret lived modestly on Social Security and a small pension. There was nothing in public records suggesting wealth. The estate sale had been handled by a distant niece who lived in Oregon. David found her name in the property records. He didn't contact her yet. He wanted to understand his legal position first. David decided to consult an attorney before doing anything else. He needed someone who specialized in property law and potentially estate law. He didn't want to mention specifics over the phone. He scheduled a consultation with a law firm in downtown Sacramento, saying only that he had questions about property discovered during home renovation. The consultation cost $250, which David put on a credit card. He met with an attorney named Barbara Feldman. She was in her 50s, experienced and direct. David explained the situation carefully. He told her about the hidden cavity, the ammunition boxes, and the coins. He told her the quantity and his estimate of value. Barbara listened without interrupting. When David finished, she asked if he had told anyone else. David said only his wife. Barbara nodded. That was good. She explained the legal situation clearly. The coins were found on David's property, within the structure of his house. Unless someone could prove ownership and demonstrate a legal claim, the coins belonged to David. The previous owner was deceased. Her estate had been settled. The property had been sold through proper channels. David was the legal owner. However, Barbara warned him about several things. First, the IRS would consider this found property, which was taxable income. The fair market value of the coins would need to be reported. Second, if the coins had been stolen at any point in history, and if that could be proven, they might be subject to recovery. Third, David should document everything carefully, including where and how the coins were found. Photographs, written records, witnesses, if possible. Fourth, he needed professional appraisal to establish value. Barbara recommended he contact a reputable coin dealer or numismatist who could evaluate the collection. She suggested getting multiple appraisals. She also recommended he secure the coins properly, either in a safe deposit box or a home safe. Finally, she advised him not to discuss this with anyone except professionals he hired for appraisal and eventual sale. News of a gold coin discovery would attract attention, potentially unwanted attention. David followed Barbara's advice methodically. He took detailed photographs of the hidden cavity before disturbing it further. He photographed the boxes in place, the shelves, the framing, everything. He photographed each box individually, then each opened box showing the contents. He photographed sample coins from different bags and boxes. He wrote a detailed account of the discovery, including dates, times, and exactly what he had been doing when he found the cavity. He had Monica sign as a witness. Then he researched coin dealers. He wanted someone established, with credentials, who dealt in significant collections. He found a dealer in San Francisco named Herman Kowalski, who had been in business for 35 years and was a member of multiple professional numismatic associations. David called and explained he had inherited a coin collection and wanted an appraisal. He didn't mention the quantity or the discovery circumstances. Herman said he could meet David at his office in San Francisco, or for larger collections, he could come to David with proper security arrangements. David said he would prefer to meet in San Francisco and would bring samples. David selected 20 coins representing the range of dates and conditions in his collection. He drove to San Francisco 3 days later and met Herman at his shop, which was in a secure building with camera surveillance and a buzzer entry system. Herman was in his late 60s, balding, with thick glasses and careful hands. David showed him the coins one at a time. Herman examined each one with a loupe, checking details, wear patterns, and authenticity markers. After reviewing all 20, Herman set them down and looked at David. He asked where these came from. David said they had been his grandfather's. Herman nodded slowly. He said these were authentic. He said they were in remarkable condition for their age. He asked if there were more. David said yes. Herman asked how many more. David said approximately 6,000 pieces, mostly gold. Herman's expression didn't change, but he was silent for several seconds. Then he said he would need to see the entire collection to provide an accurate appraisal. He said for a collection of that size, he would come to David's location with a colleague and proper security. He said there would be an appraisal fee of $5,000, given the scope of work. David agreed. One thing you should know about Fortune Beneath is that we find these stories by searching through historical records, property archives, and documented discoveries that most people never hear about. We spend weeks researching each case to bring you the most detailed accounts of real wealth found in unexpected places. If you're interested in more stories like this one, about ordinary people who discovered extraordinary fortunes, consider subscribing to the channel. We release new investigations every week, and each one digs deep into how regular Americans stumbled onto gold, cash, and valuables that changed their lives completely. The subscribe button is below this video. It helps us keep researching and sharing these remarkable discoveries with you. Herman and his colleague, a younger appraiser named Stephen Chen, arrived at David's house 1 week later. They came in an unmarked van with a security driver who waited outside. David had taken the day off work. Monica had taken the girls to her mother's house. The house was empty except for David, Herman, and Stephen. David showed them the dining room where all 42 boxes were stacked. Herman and Stephen spent the next 9 hours examining the collection. They opened every box, counted every coin, and catalogued everything by date, mint mark, and condition. They used portable scales, loupes, and reference books. They worked methodically and didn't talk much. David brought them water and coffee and stayed nearby but didn't interrupt. By late afternoon, they had completed their assessment. Herman asked if they could sit down and discuss findings. David cleared the kitchen table. Herman explained that David had one of the most significant private hoards of pre-1933 gold coins he had ever personally appraised. The collection contained 6,287 gold coins and 793 silver dollars. The gold coins had a melt value, based purely on gold content, of approximately $11.4 million at current gold prices. However, many of these coins had numismatic value exceeding their melt value due to rarity, date, condition, and mint mark. Herman estimated that at auction or through private sale, the collection could realize between $14 and $18 million depending on how it was marketed and to whom. Certain individual coins were particularly valuable. There were several 1850s double eagles in uncirculated condition that could bring $50,000 or more each. There were Carson City mint coins, which were highly sought after. There were proof coins and low mintage years. The silver dollars added another $150,000 to the total. David sat there absorbing this information. $14 to $18 million. He had been thinking it might be worth a few $100,000, maybe $1 million. This was beyond anything he had imagined. Herman continued. He said the collection appeared to have been assembled over many decades, possibly starting in the late 1800s and continuing into the 1920s or early 30s. The careful storage and preservation suggested someone who understood the value and intended to keep it safe long-term. The fact that it had been hidden in a wall suggested concern about theft or government seizure, possibly related to the 1933 gold confiscation order. Whoever hid this had never retrieved it, which meant they either died unexpectedly, forgot the location, or were unable to return. Herman said this happened more often than people realized. Hoards were discovered regularly during demolition and renovation projects. Stephen added practical advice. He said David needed to decide how to liquidate the collection. Selling everything at once would flood the market and depress prices. A better approach would be to work with a dealer or auction house to release the coins gradually over several years, targeting collectors and investors for the rare pieces while selling common dates in bulk to refiners. He said David should expect the process to take 2 to 5 years to maximize return. He also reminded David about taxes. The IRS would treat this as ordinary income unless David could establish it as a long-term capital asset, which was unlikely given the circumstances. David was looking at a significant tax liability, potentially 40% of the realized value. Herman said he could refer David to specialists who handled exactly these situations. He said his appraisal report would be ready in 1 week and would include detailed documentation suitable for tax and insurance purposes. After Herman and Stephen left, David called Barbara Feldman and updated her. She congratulated him, but immediately focused on tax strategy. She referred him to a CPA who specialized in windfalls and unusual income events. David met with the CPA, a woman named Lisa Tran, 2 days later. Lisa explained the tax situation bluntly. The IRS would consider this found property taxable in the year David reduced it to undisputed possession, which was the year he found it. The fair market value at the time of discovery would be the taxable amount. Based on Herman's appraisal, David was looking at a federal tax liability of approximately $5 to $7 million, depending on how the collection was valued and sold. California state taxes would add another $1 million or more. Lisa said David needed to structure the sale carefully. She recommended establishing an LLC to hold the collection, selling portions over multiple years to spread tax liability, and documenting everything meticulously. She said David should also consider estimated tax payments immediately to avoid penalties. She warned him that the IRS would scrutinize this heavily, and he needed to be completely transparent. David was starting to understand that having $14 million in gold coins was different from having $14 million in cash. He couldn't spend the coins, he had to convert them. That process would take years and involve significant costs including appraisal fees, dealer commissions, auction house fees, legal fees, accounting fees, insurance, and security. By the time everything was paid, including taxes, David estimated he might net $7 to $8 million. Still an extraordinary amount, still completely life-changing, but not the full $18 million. He started planning carefully. First priority was security. David rented a large safe deposit box at a bank and transferred the most valuable coins there. He installed a home safe for the rest, bolted to the foundation. He updated his homeowner's insurance with a special rider covering the collection, which cost $8,000 annually. He met with Lisa Tran regularly to plan the sales strategy. He worked with Herman Kowalski to identify which coins to sell first. The first sales began 6 months after the discovery. Herman arranged a private sale of a group of common-date double eagles to a refiner. The transaction netted $420,000. David paid estimated taxes immediately. Over the next year, he sold additional portions through a mix of auction and private sales. Each transaction was documented carefully. Proceeds went into a dedicated account. David paid quarterly estimated taxes. He kept working as a teacher. He didn't tell anyone except Monica, Barbara, Lisa, and Herman what was happening. His lifestyle didn't change noticeably at first. He paid off the credit cards quietly. He paid off Monica's car. He fixed the foundation properly, hiring professionals this time. He replaced the roof which had been leaking. He put $20,000 into the girls' college funds. But he didn't buy a new car or take a lavish vacation or move to a bigger house. He was being deliberate. By the end of the second year, David had liquidated roughly 40% of the collection. He had grossed about $6 million. After taxes, fees, and expenses, he had retained approximately $2.8 million net. He paid off the mortgage completely. That eliminated $1,200 in monthly payments. He and Monica discussed their priorities carefully. They decided David would continue teaching for at least 2 more years to maintain health insurance and keep life normal for their daughters. Monica went back to school to finish her master's degree in library science, which she had abandoned years earlier due to cost. David set up trust funds for both daughters' education, fully funded. He established retirement accounts for himself and Monica. He made conservative investments in index funds. He didn't touch principal beyond these goals. The remaining 60% of the collection continued selling gradually. 3 years after the discovery, David's total net proceeds approached $5 million after all taxes and costs. The final portions of the collection were still being marketed. Herman estimated another 2 years to complete liquidation. David and Monica's financial situation had transformed completely. They had no debt. They had funded education. They had retirement security. They had passive income from investments generating about $80,000 annually. David continued teaching because he enjoyed it, but the financial pressure was gone. Monica worked part-time as a librarian at their daughter's school. They lived in the same house, but had renovated it extensively. They took their first real vacation in a decade, spending 2 weeks in Hawaii. The girls had no idea why their parents were suddenly less stressed about money. David and Monica told them only that some investments had done well. The question of where the coins originally came from remained partially unanswered. David had researched Robert Holt, Margaret's late husband. Robert had worked for the Postal Service from 1948 until his death in 1971. His salary had been modest. There was nothing in his background suggesting wealth. Margaret's family had been farmers in the Central Valley. No wealth there either. David checked historical records for the house's original owner, who had built it in 1947. His name was Victor Drummond. Victor had been a store owner in Sacramento, running a general store and pawn shop downtown from 1920 until he retired in 1950. He sold the house to Robert and Margaret Holt in 1953 and moved to Southern California, where he died in 1968. His obituary mentioned no surviving family. David suspected Victor had accumulated the coins through his pawn shop over decades, possibly buying them from people who needed cash during the Depression and afterward. Pawn shops frequently acquired gold coins in the 1920s and 30s. Victor might have hidden them in the wall before selling the house, intending to retrieve them later but never doing so. Or perhaps he simply forgot. Or he died before he could tell anyone. The truth was unknowable. What David learned from the experience went beyond the money. He had discovered that value could exist invisibly, hidden behind ordinary walls, forgotten or abandoned, waiting to be found. The coins had been in that basement for at least 60 years, possibly 70 or more. Multiple owners had lived in the house, walked past that wall thousands of times, never knowing what was behind it. David himself had lived there 11 years before accidentally breaking through. If the foundation hadn't cracked, if he had hired a contractor instead of doing the repair himself, the coins might have remained hidden for decades more. The discovery was pure chance, but chance had required action. David had to swing the sledgehammer. He had to investigate the hollow space. He had to be willing to find out what was there. The money itself changed David's life primarily by eliminating fear. He no longer worried about car repairs or medical bills, or whether they could afford to replace the water heater. He no longer felt trapped in his job. He had options. That psychological shift was more valuable than the actual dollars in some ways. Security changes how you think and make decisions. David became more patient, more thoughtful, less reactive. He could consider long-term choices instead of immediate necessities. He could help extended family members quietly when they struggled. He could donate to causes he cared about. He could say yes to his daughters when they wanted to try new activities. The money provided space to breathe. Monica's perspective was slightly different. She had always been the more cautious of the two. When David first showed her the coins, her immediate fear was that something bad would come from it. Stolen property claims, IRS audits, legal complications, criminals targeting them. She wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly, legally, transparently. She insisted on the attorney consultations and the meticulous documentation. She pushed David to pay taxes immediately and over-comply with reporting requirements. Her caution protected them from potential problems. By the time the collection was fully documented and the legal foundation was solid, Monica relaxed. She began to see the discovery as an opportunity rather than a risk. Her master's degree program was her priority. She had delayed career advancement for years due to financial constraints. Now she could finish her education and pursue professional goals. That meant more to her than new furniture or expensive clothes. The process of selling the collection taught David patience. Herman had explained early on that flooding the market would cost David millions in lost value. Rare coins needed to find the right buyers, which took time. Some pieces sat in inventory for months before the right collector expressed interest. Auction houses worked on quarterly schedules. Private sales required negotiation. David couldn't simply cash everything in at once. The forced patience turned out to be beneficial. It prevented rash decisions. It spread tax liability. It gave David and Monica time to plan carefully. By the time significant money started flowing, they had clear goals and strategies. They didn't make mistakes that lottery winners often make, like quitting jobs immediately or buying expensive, depreciating assets or lending money to everyone who asked. They moved slowly and deliberately. David's relationship with his students didn't change. He continued teaching algebra and geometry to 9th and 10th graders. He still ate lunch in the faculty room. He still drove his 12-year-old Honda. His colleagues had no idea anything had changed in his financial situation. David preferred it that way. He didn't want to be treated differently. He didn't want assumptions made about him. Teaching grounded him. It gave him purpose beyond managing money. He liked working with teenagers, helping them understand mathematical concepts, preparing them for higher education. The job had meaning independent of the paycheck. David planned to teach for at least 5 more years, possibly longer. He might retire early, but he wouldn't stop immediately. One afternoon, about 4 years after the discovery, David was in the basement working on a carpentry project. He was building shelves for storage. He looked at the eastern wall where he had broken through the foundation. The hole had been repaired professionally. You couldn't tell anything had been there. David thought about that moment when the sledgehammer went through and he saw metal in the darkness. Everything had changed in that instant, but only because he investigated. If he had ignored it, if he had assumed it was just construction debris, if he had sealed the hole without looking further, the coins would still be there. Someone else might have found them eventually during a future renovation, or they might have remained hidden for another century. David had been the one who looked. He thought about all the other walls in all the other houses where things might be hidden. How many forgotten hoards existed? How many people had hidden wealth during uncertain times and then died before retrieving it or telling anyone? During the Depression, during wartime, during periods of inflation or financial panic, people hid cash, gold, jewelry, bonds. Some of those hiding places were discovered, most weren't. David's discovery wasn't unique in principle. It was only unique to him. The world was full of hidden value waiting to be found. Most people would never find it. Most people would walk past it every day. But occasionally someone would swing a sledgehammer in just the right place, or tear down just the right wall, or dig in just the right spot, and they would find something that changed everything. David finished building the shelves. He stored paint cans and tools on them. The basement looked organized and functional. Nothing suggested that millions of dollars in gold had once been hidden in these walls. David went upstairs. Monica was making dinner. The girls were doing homework at the kitchen table. Everything looked completely normal. And it was normal. The money hadn't made them different people. It had given them security and options, but their daily life remained grounded in routine, work, school, family. The extraordinary discovery had been absorbed into ordinary life. That seemed right to David. The point wasn't to become someone else. The point was to become a more secure and capable version of who they already were. The final coins from the collection sold in the 6th year after discovery. Herman called to let David know the last auction had closed and final proceeds would be wired within 30 days. The total gross from all sales over 6 years was $17.2 million. After taxes, fees, commissions, insurance, legal costs, and accounting fees, David's net proceeds were $8.1 million. He had paid approximately $9.1 million in combined federal and state taxes. The government had taken more than half, but David still retained enough to transform his family's financial future permanently. He invested conservatively. He maintained his lifestyle carefully. He continued working. He remained anonymous. No news coverage, no interviews, no publicity. Just a math teacher in Sacramento who had gotten exceptionally lucky during a home repair project. David sometimes wondered about Victor Drummond, the man he believed had hidden the coins. Victor had been a small business owner during difficult economic times. He had acquired gold coins when they were still currency, when people brought them into his pawn shop to trade for cash or goods. He had saved them carefully, recognizing their value. He had hidden them during a period when the government was confiscating gold. He had protected his wealth the only way he knew how, and then, for reasons unknown, he had never retrieved them. Had he forgotten? Had he been unable to access them after selling the house? Had he died suddenly? David would never know. But he felt a strange connection to Victor across 7 decades. Victor had created this hidden wealth. David had found it. The coins had served their purpose, just 60 years later than Victor intended. Money, David realized, was strange that way. It could sit dormant for generations, then suddenly become active again. The gold in those coins had been mined in California and Nevada in the 1800s. It had been minted into currency. It had circulated through the economy. It had been saved, hidden, forgotten, and finally discovered. Now it was circulating again, invested in stocks and bonds, generating returns, funding education and retirement. The value hadn't disappeared during those 60 years in the wall. It had simply been paused. David was continuing the story that Victor had started. The wealth that Victor had accumulated and protected was now providing security for David's family. There was something satisfying about that continuity. As you've seen in David's story, life-changing wealth can remain hidden for decades, sitting just behind a wall or under a floor, waiting for someone to accidentally discover it. These discoveries happen more often than most people realize. Contractors, homeowners, and renovators regularly find forgotten fortunes during ordinary projects. If you want to hear more stories like this one, about real Americans who found gold, cash, and valuables in unexpected places, Fortune Beneath brings you these detailed investigations every week. We research the circumstances, track down the details, and show you exactly how these discoveries unfolded and what happened to the people who found them. Subscribe to the channel to see the next investigation. Every story we cover, involves documented wealth found by ordinary people during routine activities. The subscribe button is right below this video. David continued living in the house where he made the discovery. He had no intention of moving. The house had given him something extraordinary. It felt wrong to abandon it. Monica agreed. They renovated extensively, but they stayed. The neighborhood knew them. The girls' school was nearby. Their lives were rooted there. Besides, David liked the idea that his story would remain part of the house's history. Future owners might never know, but David would know. This house had held a secret for 70 years and had finally revealed it to him. That created a bond. The eastern wall of the basement, where the cavity had been, was now finished with drywall and paint. David had framed the old ammunition boxes and hung them in his garage workshop as a private reminder. No one who saw them would understand their significance. They just looked like old military surplus boxes, but David knew. Every time he walked past them, he remembered the moment his sledgehammer broke through concrete and changed everything. He remembered the weight of the first coin in his hand. He remembered Monica's face when she saw what was in the box. He remembered the years of careful planning and selling. He remembered the relief of paying off debt and funding his daughter's futures. Those boxes represented one of the most significant events of his life, even though they were now empty. His daughters, now in middle school, still didn't know the full story. David and Monica had decided to wait until the girls were older to explain what had happened. There was no urgency. The financial benefits were already secured. The girls had college funds and would have opportunities. When they were mature enough to understand the responsibility and the importance of discretion, David would tell them. Probably when they were in college. For now, they just knew their parents seemed less stressed about money than their friends' parents. They went on nice vacations, they had reliable cars, their house was comfortable, that was enough. David's teaching colleagues never learned about the discovery. A few noticed that David seemed more relaxed over the years. One friend commented that David must have gotten a raise or an inheritance. David just smiled and changed the subject. He saw no benefit in sharing the information. It would change relationships. People would treat him differently. They would make assumptions. They would ask for loans or investments or donations. David wanted to avoid all of that. His financial situation was private. His professional identity remained intact. He was still Mr. Reeves, the math teacher, who explained quadratic equations with patience and used real-world examples to make concepts clear. That's who he wanted to be at work. At home, the money had eliminated a particular kind of tension that exists in households with limited resources. Monica and David used to argue about spending decisions. Small purchases became fraught. New shoes for the kids, repairs on the car, whether they could afford to go out to dinner. Those arguments were gone. They could say yes to reasonable requests without stress. They could handle emergencies without panic. The car could break down, and it was just an inconvenience, not a financial crisis. That change in dynamic strengthened their marriage. They argued less. They laughed more. They could focus on substantive issues in their relationship rather than being constantly ground down by financial pressure. David also found that his relationship with risk changed. Before the discovery, he had been extremely risk-averse because he couldn't afford mistakes. Every decision had to be safe. After securing several $1 million, David could take measured risks. He invested in his daughter's interests, even if they might not pan out. When his older daughter wanted to try horseback riding, an expensive sport, he said yes. When his younger daughter showed interest in travel abroad, he started planning educational trips. These weren't reckless expenditures. They were investments in experience and growth, made possible by financial security. David discovered he enjoyed being able to say yes. The tax burden had been significant, but manageable. Lisa Tran had structured everything properly. The IRS audited David's return for the year of discovery, which they expected. David provided complete documentation, including Barbara Feldman's legal opinion, Herman Kowalski's appraisal, photographs of the discovery, sales records, and everything else requested. The audit took 8 months and concluded with no changes. David had reported everything correctly and paid every dollar owed. The IRS accepted his position. That closure was important. David no longer worried about future legal complications. Everything was resolved and documented. By the time his daughters graduated high school, David had been retired from teaching for 2 years. He was 54 years old. Monica had finished her master's degree and was working as head librarian at a private school, a job she loved. Their older daughter was attending UCLA, studying environmental science. Their younger daughter was headed to UC Davis for veterinary medicine. Both were fully funded with no loans required. David and Monica traveled frequently, exploring places they had always wanted to see but couldn't afford. They hiked in national parks. They visited Europe. They spent time with extended family. They volunteered with organizations they cared about. David coached youth basketball. Monica mentored new librarians. Their lives had purpose and comfort. David calculated once that if he had not found the coins, he would still be teaching, still carrying debt, still stressed about money. He would be facing retirement in his late 60s with Social Security and a modest pension, hoping it would be enough. His daughters would have substantial student loans. Monica would still be working part-time at a job below her capabilities. They would be fine but constrained. The coins had removed those constraints. Everything had changed because David swung a sledgehammer at a crack in his foundation and investigated what was behind the wall. That single action, that moment of curiosity and follow-through, had created a completely different life trajectory. He thought often about how easily it could have gone differently. If the foundation hadn't cracked, no discovery. If he had hired a contractor who sealed the crack from the outside without breaking through, no discovery. If he had broken through but dismissed the boxes as junk, no discovery. If he had panicked and Continua 2211D tried to hide the find legal problems. If he had sold everything immediately to the first dealer who offered to buy it, millions lost to bad pricing. Every decision point could have led to a worse outcome. David had made the right choices consistently, partly through luck, partly through caution, partly through good advice. The result was optimal, given the circumstances. The hidden space in the basement wall had been empty now for years, filled in with concrete and sealed permanently. Nothing remained except David's memory of what had been there, but that memory was vivid and complete. He could still recall the exact moment of discovery with perfect clarity. The way the sledgehammer broke through, the beam of his flashlight revealing metal, the weight of the first ammunition box, the sound of gold coins pouring onto his workbench, the look on Monica's face. Those memories were as valuable as the money itself in some ways. They represented a moment when life pivoted, when everything changed, when the impossible became real. David understood he had been extraordinarily lucky. Millions of people renovated homes and found nothing. Millions swung sledgehammers at walls and broke through to dirt and rocks. David had hit the precise spot where value had been hidden for 70 years. The odds were microscopic, but someone had to be that person. Victor Drummond had hidden the coins with the assumption that he or someone he designated would retrieve them. That never happened. The retrieval fell to David instead, decades later, by pure accident. The wealth Victor had accumulated in the 1920s and 30s had finally served its purpose in the 21st century, supporting a family Victor never knew existed. That was how hidden wealth worked. It waited. It persisted. And eventually, if someone looked in the right place, it revealed itself and changed lives. The lesson David took from the experience wasn't that everyone should start tearing down walls hoping to find treasure. That was absurd. The lesson was simpler and more broadly applicable. Value exists in unexpected places. Sometimes you find it through investigation and curiosity. Sometimes you find it by accident while solving a different problem. But you only find it if you're willing to look and willing to act when you see something unusual. David had been willing. The crack in the foundation was a problem that needed solving. The hollow space behind the wall was an anomaly that needed investigating. Each step was logical and necessary. The extraordinary result came from ordinary actions executed properly. Now, years after the discovery, David lived comfortably but not extravagantly. He drove a nice but not flashy car. He lived in a renovated but modest house. He dressed casually. He didn't wear expensive jewelry or watches. Nothing about his appearance suggested wealth. He preferred it that way. Anonymity was valuable. It allowed him to move through the world without assumptions or expectations. People treated him as a regular person, which he was. The money hadn't changed his character or values. It had simply removed obstacles and provided security. David was the same person he had always been, just with better sleep at night and fewer worries. Monica felt similarly. She had grown up without much money and had learned to be content with little. The discovery hadn't made her desire luxury goods or status symbols. She wanted security, education for her daughters, and the ability to pursue meaningful work. She had all of that now. Her master's degree had led to a career she found fulfilling. Her daughters were thriving. Her marriage was strong. The money had enabled those outcomes, but wasn't the source of happiness itself. Monica understood the difference. She was grateful for the security, but knew that relationships, purpose, and health mattered more than bank balances. Their daughters, now in college, were developing their own relationship with money. They knew their education was paid for, which removed significant stress. But David and Monica had been careful not to spoil them. The girls had part-time jobs. They budgeted their spending. They understood that the family's financial security came from luck and careful management, not from entitlement. David had explained enough for them to understand they were fortunate, but not enough to make them careless. He would tell them the full story eventually. When they graduated and started their own careers, he would explain what had happened, how he had handled it, and what they might learn from it. The discovery had also changed David's perspective on history. He had always taught history as part of his math curriculum, using historical context to frame mathematical problems. After finding the coins, he became more interested in the stories behind historical artifacts. Every old coin, every document, every object had a story. Someone had made it, owned it, used it, saved it, lost it. Those stories were often forgotten, but the objects persisted. David's coins had stories spanning 150 years. Miners had dug the gold from mountains. Mints had pressed it into coins. People had spent them, saved them, traded them. Victor Drummond had acquired them slowly over decades. He had hidden them. They had waited. David had found them. And now that gold was back in circulation, transformed into investments and education and security, the metal would outlast everyone involved in its story. David had kept one coin, a single double eagle dated 1874. It was in excellent condition, worth about $20,000. He kept it in a small safe at home. He had no intention of selling it. It was a reminder, a physical connection to the discovery. Sometimes he would take it out and hold it, feeling the weight and texture. It was heavy, substantial, real. This piece of gold had existed for 150 years. It would exist for centuries more. David was just one person in its long story, but he was the person who had brought it back into the light after 70 years of darkness. That meant something to him. The story of David Reeves and the gold coins hidden in his basement was not unique in the annals of found treasure, but it was unique to him and his family. It was the story of how a math teacher in Sacramento swung a sledgehammer at a crack in his foundation and found enough wealth to transform his family's future for generations. It was the story of careful decisions, professional guidance, patient liquidation, and appropriate caution. It was the story of luck meeting preparation meeting action, and it was the story of value hiding in plain sight for 70 years, waiting for the right moment and the right person to reveal itself. Gold has a quality that makes it perfect for hiding. It doesn't corrode or decay. It can sit in darkness for centuries and emerge unchanged. Paper money deteriorates, jewelry tarnishes, but gold persists. That's why people throughout history have hidden gold when they feared theft, confiscation, or economic collapse. They knew it would wait. They knew it would retain value. They knew that if they or their descendants ever needed it, it would be there. Sometimes it was retrieved, often it was not. The earth and the walls of old buildings hold countless forgotten hoards. David's discovery was one of thousands that have occurred, and thousands more that will occur as old structures are demolished and renovated. The specific location of David's house will remain undisclosed. He has not publicly identified himself or his property. This account exists because David agreed to share his story with researchers on condition of anonymity. He wanted others to know that these discoveries happen, that value can hide for generations, and that ordinary people can find extraordinary wealth through a combination of circumstance and action. But he had no interest in publicity or attention. His life now was comfortable and private, and he intended to keep it that way. The ammunition boxes that once held millions in gold coins now hang empty in David's garage. The cavity in the basement wall is sealed and invisible. The coins themselves are scattered across the country, in collections and investments and refineries, continuing their centuries-long journey through the economy. Only David and those he has chosen to tell know the complete story. The house on a quiet street in Sacramento looks like every other house on the block. Nothing suggests that one of the largest private hoards of pre-1933 gold coins ever found in California was hidden in its basement for 70 years. But it was. And David Reeves found it when he swung a sledgehammer at a crack in the foundation, trying to save $1,500 on a repair job. That's how it happens. That's how lives change. A crack appears. You investigate. You find something impossible. You make the right decisions. You protect what you found. You convert it carefully. You pay what you owe. You secure your family's future. And then you continue living quietly and carefully, knowing that you were in the right place at the right moment, and you had the sense to act.